السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم اشرح لنا صدورنا ويسر لنا أمورنا واحلل عقد ألسنتنا نفقه قول بعضنا. جزاكم الله خيرا for coming today to our last monthly gathering before the summer, inshallah. And the program is as follows. So inshallah we'll start with Quran recitation with Sheikh Ibrahim. We'll inshallah have afterward a keynote by Sister Samara. And inshallah the next keynote, Imam Yahya has, his child was admitted to hospital. So inshallah he is not going to be here. And inshallah I will be talking to you guys about inshallah mediation for the Muslim community. And after that, inshallah, we'll have a Q&A with the speakers, and then we'll have the draw and the dinner, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So inshallah, without further ado, I would like to welcome Sheikh Ibrahim al-Jaradi to recite some ayat for us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن آياته أن خلقكم من تراب ثم إذا أنتم بشر تنتشرون. ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم إن في ذلك لآيات للعالمين. ومن آياته منامكم بالليل والنهار وابتغاؤكم من فضله إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يسمعون. ومن آياته يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا وينزل من السماء ماء فيحيي به الأرض بعد موتها إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يعقلون. ومن آياته أن تقوم السماء والأرض بأمره ثم إذا دعاكم دعوة من الأرض إذا أنتم تخرجون. وله من في السماوات والأرض كل له قانتون. وهو الذي يبدأ الخلق ثم يعيده وهو أهون عليه وله المثل الأعلى في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sheikh Ibrahim. So inshallah, right now we will have Sister Samara Graves. She is going to introduce an initiative in the community. It's called the Victoria Triage Team. I want to mention something about this initiative. Inshallah, today's program is sponsored by the Victoria Triage Team, and inshallah, it'll benefit this community in ways on the short run as well as the long run. So inshallah, without further ado, I would like to welcome Sister Samara. She's a paralegal in our community. She's a well-known community member. So without further ado, inshallah, please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Brother Mustafa. Oh, here's the clicker. As Brother Mustafa mentioned, I am Samara Graves. I am a paralegal in the community as part of the triage team, the Integrative Community Triage Team, which is an outreach program of the Haq Foundation. Next. Here we go. Thank you. The founder of the program, some of you may recognize her. She's very well known in our community, Shaheen Jones. Shaheen has a doctoral degree in counseling psychotherapy. She is a practicing psychotherapist with over 15 years of working in the hospital and community settings. She is an approved registered clinical supervisor with the BC Association of Clinical Counselor and Canadian Psychotherapy Association. She is also the founder and an executive director of Haq Foundation, a program that was established in 2018 to support newcomers to the Victoria area with free life skills training. In her private practice, she specializes in treatment of relapsed trauma, active acute symptoms, and offers wellness education program for prevention of burnout. Oh, I don't know where I've gone. I can do it from my notes.
If you'd like, I can control it for you.
Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you. As a trauma therapist, Shaheen also volunteers as a social well-being officer with the Canadian Red Cross Society, supporting frontline volunteers and beneficiaries that have experienced traumatic events. The triage team. What are we about? Our missions and our goals. This project was initiated last year after recurring need from our Islamic brothers and sisters reaching out to get mental health support for themselves, their families, their peers, and their friends. All the triage team members are professionals with a wealth of experiences and competences to support the mission of the team. The primary goal of the triage team is to prioritize immediate mental health interventions and to allocate resources to support the client efficiently based on the severity of their crisis or situation. The tasks associated with our team include responding to an individual mental health crisis call or directing the client or the caller to dial 911 or immediately go to the hospital if that is required. If not needing medical attention immediately, then completing the expression of interest form for the crisis call and emailing it to the team inbox, and I'll provide you with that shortly thereafter. Attending consultation meetings once a month to go over the case conceptualization with all team members. Collaborating and developing an effective crisis intervention appropriate to the case at hand. Delegating appropriate team members to execute the recommended interventions, and other team members to offer the client with resources until they can reach out to their own medical team and services. And for more information on our triage team or psychological services in the wellness program, you can reach Shaheen directly at info@hersvictoria.com. I just wanted to let you all know that this is a free service. Shaheen is a highly educated woman in our community, mashallah, and I know her on a personal level. She's just wonderful. This is something that we're all very passionate about, and the service is being offered to the community for free. I'd like to take a moment to introduce the other triage team members, and I'm probably going to butcher some of these names. My apologies. Faraz Dowdy. Faraz holds a master's in political science and a diploma in human resource management from Cambridge University. He is the principal of an Arabic school and also the board member for the Quadra Community Center. Shazia Rashad, who many of you know in the community. Shazia is the current chairperson of the BC Muslim Association Victoria Women's Chapter. She is the founder of the local Islamic library at Masjid Al-Iman, the Wiser Learning Center for Youth, and several other youth programs in Victoria. She has worked in youth employment for several years at VIRCS, which is the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center. Hannah Al-Kaddafi. Hannah has a degree in material science engineering, a diploma in community, family, and child studies, and a Master of Art degree. She volunteers at ICA as a translator in settlement services and is the settlement and education coordinator for the HUC program. Ayman Bourguiba. Ayman is a well-known community member who works in student services as the co-op community coordinator at the University of Victoria. Ahmed Al-Gindi. Ahmed is a pharmacist, and he is the current maintenance coordinator for the BCMA Victoria Branch Brothers Board. Mustafa Abousaleh. Brother Mustafa. Mustafa is currently doing a master's in Islamic chaplaincy. He has founded various charitable organizations and has provided sensitivity training to over 300 organizations. He holds many degrees, including a Master's of Applied Sciences, Engineering, Entrepreneurship, and Business from the University of Victoria, as well as a Master's Certificate in Project Management and a Bachelor degree in Islamic Studies. And last but not least, there is myself. Again, my name is Samara Graves. I am a senior paralegal with over 24 years of experience in the areas of law, including my favorite and most interesting, criminal defense, civil litigation, family, and employment law. I currently co-manage the boutique law office where I have worked for 10 years, and some of you may know me as I was the former secretary of the Victoria Sisters Board for 2 years at Masjid Al-Imam. Now, I know most people in this room, if not all of us, except for the little folk, have full-time employment. Some of us have children. Some of us might take care of an elderly relative or a family member with special needs. Some of us are facing a big change of circumstances like moving or taking on a new job. And at least one of us in this room this evening accidentally volunteered to do a speech in a room full of people. That would be me. Any one of these circumstances can create high stress on a daily basis, which, if not addressed properly, can lead to mental health illnesses, such as depression or anxiety. And if you're dealing with multiple situations that are challenging, this increases the likelihood of developing stress-related health issues, whether it be physical or psychological. Of course, there are some people who are born with mental health issues, some major and complex, and others mild and more treatable. Some types of the cases that our triage team have been dealing with in the community involve people suffering from mental health issues as a result of, for example, going through a divorce, dealing with alcohol and drug addiction, trauma they have witnessed or have endured, and/or family violence. There is a real need in our community for mental health support. Shaheen assists clients by dealing directly with their mental health concerns, and the rest of the triage group use our knowledge, experience, and resources to assist in areas that may be causing or contributing to the stress. For example, if someone needs to learn about receiving free legal advice, if someone needs information on low-income housing or a lead on childcare or a translator, that is where the rest of the triage team come in to assist. I know that I'm going out on a limb here. I just spoke to my friend Grace. I gave her a rundown of the speech this evening, and I told her I was going to do this, and she said, okay. So I'm going to go out on a limb anyways. And I'm going to talk to you for a moment about my personal health. I share this information with you, brothers and sisters, not for empathy or for sympathy, but to show the normalcy in discussing matters that are causing our health to suffer. Over the past few years, I have suffered trauma. I was in an unhealthy relationship. I lost my father quite suddenly 5 days after the birth of my first child. Then, months after the loss of my close aunt and my grandparent, I became a single mother and worked a very demanding job. I started showing physical signs of stress that I ignored. I kept telling myself it would get better, it would go away. Maybe if I ate healthier or tried exercising, which are both good things, they could solve the issues. I ignored the signs and the symptoms of stress, which led to anxiety, and eventually, because I ignored it so long, having to take a medication for a period of time. For those of you who are here and know me, in particular the brothers and the sisters who worked with me on the board many years ago, I'd like to think you could agree that I'm a strong and capable person, but even the strong can break sometimes. I understand that some of you come from households or cultures that may not recognize that mental health problems exist, or if you recognize that they exist, then you're certainly not going to talk about them openly. There can be a stigma attached to having mental health issues. Some people view it as a weakness or an embarrassment to themselves or their family, but there is no shame in seeking help. If anyone would like more information about the triage team, or if you would like to speak with Shaheen directly, I'm happy to provide you with her contact information. I have brought with me this evening some expression of interest forms that I can complete if there's anyone here today who would like assistance from the triage team, or if you know someone who may be in need of support. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Olive Branch Revival Foundation and Brother Mustafa for being able to sponsor this evening's dinner and attend this function. I hope that this evening can be a starting point for some of you to assess your personal health and to know that there is support. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Samara, for this. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And as I said, Imam Yahya Mumla was supposed to be here, but his son was admitted to the hospital. So we make dua for him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal his son and protect him and protect his family as well. In fact, Imam Yahya has sent an email just after this happened, and he's taking kind of a step back from public life. Which, as you all know, once you're an imam or a lead in a community, there's no private life. So he stepped back a little bit. So inshallah, what we'll do today is that I am going to talk to you about a very interesting topic. I'm going to use this mic. I'm going to be talking about faith-based mediation and arbitration for Canadian Muslims. This was based on a research that I have done, extensive research that looked at some of the models that we have in Canada here, from both a legal perspective as well as from an Islamic perspective. How do you go about resolving disputes in Canada, whether these are commercial disputes or family disputes, in a way that is friendly to our faith? The research is very extensive. I have only, maybe 40 minutes, so I'm going to make it as interesting as possible, and I would love to get your engagement because you will understand the importance of this topic and how eventually it's going to hit the Victoria community. It has hit other communities already, and it's coming to Victoria community at some point. So it's important for us to see, well, what happened in the past. A lot of this research, there's a historical context to it. For some weird reason, all the documents that are related to this research and that are related to what happened in Ontario around the period of 2003, they were completely erased off the internet. Government documents, research papers, for some weird reason, all of this stuff was completely erased. So for me to get this information, I had to jump hoops. I had to contact people. I had to have in-depth interviews with some of the people that lived in that era. And when they got my call, they were very surprised that, you're bringing something from ancient history, 2003. That's like 20 years ago. But we have to understand it because it's part of the narrative that we're going to build moving forward. If you don't understand what happened, it's very hard to move forward. Now, I want to start with some questions and definitions. When you hear the word court, how do you feel? How do you feel when you hear the word court? Scared. Scared, okay. Judged, okay. Justice, okay. So positive and negative feelings. All right. How would you feel when you hear the word Sharia or Sharia as it's said in the media? Fairness, okay, positive. Law and order, okay. Any kind of negative feelings when you hear the word Sharia? Misunderstood, punishment, okay. So what if you put these together? Sharia court. What's the first feeling that come to you? Al-Mahakim al-Shari'iyya. What's the first feeling that you get when you see the word Sharia court? Conflict resolution, okay. How would other people feel? Not you, because we're all perfect here. How would other people feel when they hear the word Sharia court? Worry, okay. Very good. What else? Sorry? Soothe, okay. How would you feel, brothers, when you hear the word, or other people, not you, we're all perfect here. Sharia court, how would you feel? Sorry? How would anybody feel about it? Muslims and non-Muslims?
Scared.
Scared, okay. Why would people feel scared? Or worried? Or why would they even feel like, positive feelings, if any?
Media hype.
Media fight?
Media hype.
Okay, media hype. Okay, very good. What's, okay, Brother Bilal?
It's misunderstood.
Misunderstood, okay. The image of cutting hands, chopping heads, all this stuff. Yes, sister?
Privacy comes to light.
Privacy, very good. Issues of privacy. All right. What is alternative dispute resolution? So usually when there's a conflict between two people, whether it is commercial, related to business, or related to family, the first thing that comes to mind, take them to court, right? Who has that feeling, like sometimes, or heard it from others? There's a divorce in the community, oh, take him to court, or take her to court. There's an issue of custody, take them to court. Oh, I have an issue in a business dealings, go to court. Anybody felt that? Like people are very quick to say, take them to court, right? Anybody felt that? Yes, Robert.
Often the law mandates you go to court.
Sometimes the law mandates you go to court. That's right, in some cases. The law also provides other tools. They're called mediation and arbitration. These are called alternative dispute resolution. Now, what's so special about this? When we talk about mediation, we're talking about getting those two parties, those disputant parties, to sit together and resolve the issue amicably. What does amicably mean? It means that there is no judge. There's no one to make a decision. I have an issue with Brother Robert. I'm going to sit with Brother Robert. Maybe we'll have a mediator, an impartial mediator, and we're going to talk it out until we figure it out. Once we figure it out, we sign an agreement. Okay, alhamdulillah, I agree, he agrees, we're good, we can move on. An arbitrator, on the other hand, is that you bring those two disputing parties or disputants into the room and you bring an arbiter. An arbiter is someone who has the power to make a decision. So they can make that decision that is a binding decision in Canada where they would keep the matter between the three of them, and once the arbiter says, okay, well, now I heard everything according to my understanding of the law and my understanding of the situation, I decided X should happen. It's documented, doesn't need to go public, but it is binding. Now, mediators and arbitrators, they usually go through training and certification if they're going to do this professionally. But there is a sticky situation. And that sticky situation is if someone is arbitrating between two people or two parties, what are they doing that arbitration based on? Before we get there, I'm gonna talk about some of the benefit of ADRs. So ADRs, alternative dispute resolution, mediation, and arbitration, they have a benefit of speed, cost, and privacy. So what happens if someone goes to court? Does anyone know anybody in the community that took someone else to court? You all should be raising your hand. All of you. That's assuming you are not involved in it personally, right? Now, who knows someone who took someone to court and they've never resolved the situation? Who knows someone that might have went to court and the case lasted so long that one of the parties died anyway, and the situation hasn't been resolved? The moment a case goes to court, it becomes public, and it costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time. So when we go to mediation and arbitration, it remains private, so that information and what the discussions remain private. They're much lower cost, and they're much faster to resolve. If someone pursues a mediation instead of arbitration, they have the advantage of creating a win-win situation, because they're not going to get out of that room until all parties agree. That's an extra advantage, where like everyone feels that they have won in this. Everybody put in their thoughts into it, everybody reached a decision amicably, and everyone is happy. In arbitration, it's also better than going to court in certain circumstances, but the feeling that comes about is that someone lost and the other person won, usually. Now, there's a core problem here of disputes at a community level. In any dispute, there is costs. There's a cost to the individual. They could be distressed. They need to pay some money. I'll give you an example. Let's say it's a divorce situation. So a couple are deciding to divorce. There's a cost to them individually. That's the first level. There's a cost to that on a family level, because the family might end up breaking apart. If they don't resolve the situation between them in an amicable, friendly way, and they're all happy, the children will suffer. Their friends will suffer, because now friends have to take sides. If those people were community organizers, they were leaders in the community or involved in the community now suffers. The imam has to take a side. Their friends have to take sides. Organizations have to take sides. And what happens on top of that is that generations, this dispute cost carries on for generations. Who knows someone, maybe their grandparents, divorced, and until now, the generations are still suffering. People are not talking to each other. People don't sit in same, gatherings. Does anyone know people like this? I do. This is very common. So what ends up happening in disputes is that if they're not resolved in a friendly way, they don't just cost the individual, they cost the family, they cost the friends, they cost the community, and they cost the next generations. In Canada, generally, most people, in any sort of dispute, they could be involved in a commercial situation, a commercial dispute, or a family or personal dispute. So business or family, generally speaking. There's also the penal code, the criminal code, there's the martial law, all this, but generally most people are involved in commercial disputes or family disputes. Do you guys agree? Generally speaking? Generally speaking? Okay. Now, Canadian law, it does allow and give room for mediation and arbitration. You don't have to go to court immediately. In fact, the court can mandate mediation and arbitration. The sticky question here is that if people go to arbitration, which choice of law are they going to choose? Are they going to choose Canadian law? Are they going to choose Jewish law? Are they going to choose Sharia law, Egyptian law, Syrian law? Which law are they going to use? And what are the implications to that? In Canada, you could have a choice of law in many situations. In many cases, you could choose whichever law you want to arbiter that situation based on. Not everything. Now, Canada as a state has a very vested interest in its subjects, in the people that are us, especially in the family and family matters. So what that did is that despite that on the provincial level, every province has its own laws pertaining to arbitration and mediation, now there's a shared jurisdiction for family law between the province and the federal government. Because they're interested in the children, they're interested in the well-being of the subjects, they're interested in the family situation, in the support that might come out of it, the custody support, the child support, all that stuff. Now, there is a leeway in provincial law that allows a choice of law that a person can select another jurisdiction or another law, and the court will not interfere with it as long as it's fair and just. So we have potential, the Jewish community, they have their courts, they would apply the Jewish law. In Canada here, it's not established that Muslims apply their law in an official way, but that's a possibility. It happens in the UK, as long as it's fair and just. Are you guys following with me here? I'm just trying to build to something that I'm going to give you, which will shock everyone here. Now, in Islam, is it encouraged to use alternative dispute resolutions? I'm not going to let you read this. Is it encouraged? It is encouraged, right? So I'll give you just a couple of examples. In the Quran, it says in some situations, again, this has a deep fiqh to it, if there is an issue between a husband and a wife, and it got to a point where they cannot figure it out, you can send an arbiter from her family, an arbiter from his family, to try to reach a specific, amicable decision. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because there's so much ahkam under that, when that happens, why it happens, all of that. But it's available. The Prophet ﷺ, in the incident of the black stone of the Kaaba, when the tribes almost fought amongst each other, who's going to put the black stone back in the Kaaba after the Kaaba got destroyed and was rebuilt, the Prophet came and mediated the situation in such a way that resolved that dispute. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ used Jewish law for the Jewish community to arbitrate between them. So people from the Jewish community would approach the Prophet ﷺ, and he would use the Jewish law to resolve the situation between them. So from an Islamic perspective, arbitration and mediation, there are foundations for that. The Jewish community, they have well-developed, very, very well-developed systems for mediation arbitration. In fact, it's called Beit Din, which you could translate into Arabic, Beitud Din, the house of religion, or the house of Din. Very well developed in the world and in Canada, in which they bring knowledgeable Jewish rabbis, that 3 of them would sit on any case that would come, whether it is commercial or family, and they would decide based on what they hear between the 2 parties. They would sit these 2 parties in, there's a nominal fees, they get paid not to them, it gets paid to the institution itself. So these guys, none of them, they know how much the person paid, why they paid, what is their situation. They're trying to be as objective as possible to avoid that bias. They take this stuff and document it very well, so much so that if there was a potential appeal to the court, it's well documented, the court will, and it's well aligned with the Canadian law, that the court would say, it's good, you go ahead with it. And this was good until 2006, and we'll talk about that, once we get there. In the Muslim community, and this is going to be sometimes a shock to people, there are ADR models, alternative dispute resolutions. Most of them are informal. Does anyone here know someone who had either a commercial dispute, a business dispute, or a personal dispute, and they're like, let's go to the imam. Let's go figure this out with the imam. And the imam would have to sit, listen to story after story after story and come to decide between these people. Or they might go to a community leader and say, well, let's, we have an issue here, help us figure it out. Does anyone know anybody like that? No one? Oh, okay, mashallah, yes. Almost all of us know this. In Ontario, which is a very hot spot, law changed in 1991, allowing different communities to have third-party arbiters that can make decisions based on a choice of law. That's why the Jewish community were able to do it. That's why if Muslims were organized at that time, they could have done something that is Islamic-based. But this continued from 1991 until 2003, when there was an attempt to institutionalize, to create an institution in the Muslim community that they wanted to call the Sharia courts. And then all hell broke loose. Brother Sayyid Mumtaz Ali, he passed away in 2009. Who was in Ontario around 2003? Did anyone, you were there? Do you know the story? You don't, okay. And you're not going to find it on the internet anywhere. They removed everything about it, everything. It's very, very, very scary.
What do you mean?
Sorry?
What do you mean?
All the documents that are related to what I'm going to tell you right now, they're taken off the internet. The reports, the government reports, the research papers, everything. I was surprised. It took me a long time to study this because it's very important for a community to understand what happened. So Sayyid Mumtaz Ali, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him, very, very good lawyer. He's originally from India. He immigrated into Canada. He practiced law for a very, very long time. And in 2003, he came up with a proposal. He wanted to start an institution called the Islamic Institute of Civil Justice to be the foundations for Sharia-based mediation and arbitration in Canada. Very nice guy, very nice guy. His heart is there. He's a lawyer. He has some Islamic training behind the scenes. And he went and he wanted to start that. So in March 2004, he incorporated with 30 other people, 30 community members, a for-profit business called Darul Qada Muslim Court of Arbitration. So 2 key points here. This was a for-profit business that is trying to establish the foundations for Sharia as a method of law in Canada for arbitration. So make a decision that is binding to the disputants. Very quickly, that group, the moment this was incorporated, the 30 people that were on it immediately had a dispute between themselves. Funny, right? Did they resolve it in any amicable way? No. That group split. And it split because they debated whether that should be a for-profit or not for-profit. Whether they should use the word Sharia in it or not. Whether it should have political efforts in it or not. And a group of them went and started a non-profit organization that has the same name almost, Darul Qada Canada Inc. Because they believed that it should be not a business. But what else do you think happened? What else do you think happened after this?
They took some of them to Canadian court.
That's a very good, guess. Alhamdulillah, that didn't happen.
Sued each other?
They sued each other? Maybe some of them passed away. They didn't get to suing each other. What happened is that a bunch of self-identifying Muslim progressive females or women went and started or led a huge list of organizations. Huge. This is just part of it. And they started to lobby against the potential of any ADR in the Muslim community that is based on Sharia. All these names and even more, I couldn't list them here because I would go on for pages. And they started to lobby very, very hard against any tribunals. Tribunals are basically, where you have the two disputants and the judge, sitting together, that are based on Islamic law. They don't want that to happen. And did they lobby in the Muslim community? No. They lobbied outside. So this became, in 2003 to 2006, one of the hottest topics in Canada, trying to figure out what are we going to do with Sharia law. Now, mind you, that the law allowed for tribunals to exist based on any faith, so it was fine. But due to that misunderstanding, there was a lack of communication inside the community. This involved the government, involved the media, involved the academics, involved men, women, children. Everybody was talking about this. The masajid got involved, Muslim organization got involved, turned into a hot mess. And generally speaking, there were two concerns. The first one is that whether the Muslim woman would be coerced into submitting to Sharia-based tribunals, and if they didn't accept to submit to the Sharia-based tribunals, they would be ostracized from the community. And the other one, which is very interesting, is that there was worry about which Sharia law are we going to use. Are we going to use Sharia law from Egypt, from Pakistan, from India, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, from Canada? Which Sharia law are we going to use? How are we going to decide these matters? Those were general concerns. Specific concerns, which everybody, the moment you read, they'll be like, yes, everybody, would be concerned. They categorize them into four. The first one is what's called al-iddah, is when a man and a woman divorce, there's a time, a grace period, in which, in Islamic tradition, they would wait before they get married again. And there's a lot of ikhtilaf amongst the scholars, how that works, how you calculate it, whatever. So that was an important point. The other one is mahar, or what's called the dowry, the gift to the woman upon marriage, specifically the delayed component. I'll give an example later on. So in some Islamic cultures, the customs is that you have a muqaddam, you have something that you give as a dowry upfront, and then there's a mu'akhar that you would pay before you die. And if you die before you give it or gift it to your wife, she would have to take it from your inheritance. So the person, before they pass away, before they die, they have to give that, the rest of the mahar. And then the hadana, the child custody. Who takes care of the child? In Islam, there's a whole bunch of tradition about that. And then there's the mirath, the inheritance, of course. And obviously the first thing that people would hear is that, why would a man take twice the woman? If you know anything about inheritance law, there's only two situations from the many situations that, a woman would take half of what the man is. And in something like 21 situations, she would take more than the man. People don't know this stuff. People just know, okay, she will take half of the man. And this is an issue. Nobody knows Sharia. Everybody's just talking. Beautiful. And this conflict, as I said, although it centered the IICG of Sayyid Mumtaz Ali, it involved many other Muslim organizations. One of those prominent ones was Masjid al-Nur. Masjid al-Nur is a very active masjid in Toronto. In 2003, it had an informal mediation program. And I actually managed to get hold of the chief mediator at that time, Brother Mubin. And this was, it's very hard to get hold of these people. But he was involved right in this big mess. And I interviewed him in depth. I asked him about certain things, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. Obviously not everything, but I'll tell you some stuff about it. His family actually is a family that has built many of the establishments in the Muslim community in Toronto. So he came from an environment of, generally Islamically practicing. And then he went and he studied in Syria. He made Hajj in 2003. And then he came back. When he landed back into Toronto, the signs on the roads were anti-Sharia courts. They were all over the place. So he was surprised, I left a year ago. What happened in 1 year? Well, what happened is that this anti-Sharia, anti-faith-based arbitration movement took to the streets, not just in academia and emails and stuff. It was all over the place. So for him, having some background in Islamic studies, being born and raised in Toronto, he became kind of the de facto spokesperson for the Sharia courts at that time. So he was able to answer the questions, rebuttal with the many other organizations. In fact, he was called into many meetings that resulted from the commissioning of Marion Boyd. Marion Boyd, she passed away in 2022. Unfortunately, I couldn't get hold of her before she passed away, unfortunately. She was the Attorney General of Ontario. What is an Attorney General? An Attorney General is a legal advisor to the government. She was the legal advisor to the government around that time. And the government, because this became a hot topic, commissioned her to investigate what is the story of faith-based tribunals and how do we move forward. Hot topic, figure out Sharia law. And she did. She did a very good job. Her report, it's very difficult to get hold of it. It's a very extensive report, very objective report. Alhamdulillah, I managed to get hold of it, a copy of it. And she held many discussion groups that Mubin was involved in. And he described to me some of what happened during these discussion groups and whatnot. At the end of the day, she finished her report stating certain recommendations. And she studied the Jewish model, she studied the Ismaili models, she looked at what the Muslim community were doing there, and generally the report was positive. In fact, she introduced her conclusion. It's a very long report, but the introduction of her conclusion is that arbitration should continue to be an alternative dispute resolution option that is available in family inheritance law cases, subject to further recommendations of this review. She added other recommendations to just make sure that people are not being unfair. And then the second recommendation is that Arbitration Act should continue to allow disputes to be arbitrated using religious law, if the safeguards currently prescribed and recommended by this review is observed. So she had some safeguards there to make sure that people are not abused using religion. But generally speaking, she was positive for what was happening since 1991. Keep this going. Now, what do you think happened after this report was published? This report was published in December 2024. 2004. This is a mistake. 2004, December 2004, only 20 years difference. Well, what happened is that it didn't matter. Because by September 11th, 2005, the Ontario Premier, Dalton McQuinty, he went public and he said, there will be no Sharia law in Ontario. There will be no religious arbitration in Ontario. There will be one law for all Ontarians. Just out of the blue. Now, behind the scenes, what was happening is that the anti-tribunal lobbyists, they managed to convince the 17 members of the Liberal Party Women's Caucus at Queen's Park to speak against the Islamic tribunals. And this lobbying ended up resulting in a law change. You know how hard it is to change law in Canada? It's very difficult. But this happened so quick that in 2006, an amendment came, and basically it would not acknowledge any arbitration decision based on any law except Canadian law. Now you can imagine the Jewish community were not happy. Nobody was happy with this, but it became a reality. And this impacted all faith-based communities in Ontario. Some reflections that I think are very important for us to know, that the work to somehow try to bring in the concept of Islamic faith as part of law started actually in 1986. And when we came as a community in Ontario, not me specifically, but the Ontario Muslim community, to discuss how to structure this, they did not agree beforehand how they want to structure it. There was no plan. It was just like, okay, Bismillah, we've had all this talk about it. Let's start, a for-profit and then a non-profit. And they didn't figure out the details before they did that. And that resulted in an opportunistic approach. Everybody wanted to jump the wagon. but they forgot that there are people that will also jump the wagon on the other side. So there was no person to educate the community or the general public about what this meant. And also there was another issue that was happening within the Muslim community that was very shady. There were shady practices in the Muslim community that were happening at that time, which almost none of us here would be aware of. And I'll give you just one example. One example. I can't give all the examples because it'll take so long. Who knows what a halala is? They call it halala. What's a halala? Extortion? Okay, good. Good guess, but that's not it. Okay, what happens in Islamic law if a couple divorce 3 times? What happens? That's right. So in Islamic law, and this is in the Quran, is that at-talaqu marratan. Divorce is twice. A 3rd time that it happens, so what that means that twice they can come back after it. Whether within the iddah, with the grace period, or afterward they can get married again. But after the 3rd time, there's no return back until the woman marries someone else, they live the relationship, and if they don't like each other, and they divorce, then those first couple can come back together. This is a protective mechanism for the family. Because there could be abuse, there could be an issue of spiritual pressures, there could be issues of physical pressures. This is a way to protect the family from this gamification of marriage. Oh, I don't like you, you're divorced. So Islam says 3 times. After that, you cannot until she marries someone else. Now, what was happening in that community is that there were men, including figures in the community, that would raise their hand up and they would say, I will take one for the team. And they would go and engage in an intimate relationship with the female in order to allow her to go back to her husband. And they call that the halala practice. Is this allowed in Islam? Not allowed, right? Do you know what the Prophet called the person who does that? At-taysul ma'jur. At-taysul ma'jur is the borrowed billy goat. A billy goat is a male goat. So what happens is that if you have a whole bunch of sheep, you would rent a billy goat to impregnate, the sheep, and then the goat would just go back. The Prophet called the person who does this at-tays, the belly goat. And then he said, لَعَنَ اللَّهُ الْمُحَلِّلَ وَالْمُحَلَّلَ لَهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed the person who is doing this halala thing and the person that is being done for. So this is very haram stuff. But this was happening in the community. So when we come to reflect about this experience, it's important to understand these things. Now, how much time do I have, Sheikh? 15. I still have 15 minutes? Okay, mashallah. Wow, you guys are... is this interesting? Should I keep going? Yes. Yeah? Is it interesting? Okay. Oh, wow. I'm glad. Okay, so let me right now dive into another topic. 15 minutes, Sheikh? 15, sir? Okay. So now I want to shift gears to look at a model that is working in the Ismaili community. The Ismaili community in 1986, the Aga Khan, he issued a directive and he said we want to establish something called the Coalition and Arbitration Board, CAB, to allow people to resolve their disputes in an amicable way within the Ismaili community. So they started this, and in Canada, they started 5 chapters. And their whole premise is trying to resolve any disputes based on ethical mediation. So we're not talking about arbitration here. They're not ruling. Yes, it's called arbitration board, but they're not ruling. They're using mediation. They're trying to bring the parties together, allow them to talk it out in the presence of really professionally trained mediators, really, really good people, and to reach an agreement that is based on ethics. And I'll explain why this is important. And they had 70% success rate. This is fantastic, by the way. 70% is fantastic. And only recently, I interviewed the two chairpersons of CAB, the provincial and the national one, in an extensive conversation. And up to December 2023, they had everything done under mediation, but they started arbitration only recently, and they only arbitrated 2 cases that are commercial, business, not family. Because family now, if you try to arbitrate family stuff, now the government gets involved, courts get involved, you have to be very careful with that. But in business cases, they managed to arbitrate 2. Now, this model that they have, that they've developed, it's based on the Ismaili doctrine, based on the Ismaili fiqh, which means it is faith-based. But they took the fiqh and they put it on an ethical plane, something that is more universal. And I'll show you how they did that. So they created an ecosystem. They said, okay, if we want the betterment of our jama'ah, they call it jama'at, the Ismaili community, they call it jama'at. If we want a better community for us, then we cannot just have CAB, which is the one that, the organization that does the mediation, but we should have other sister organizations. Like, okay, interesting. So a case comes. When the cases are resolved or not, they get anonymized. All the data, all the information about the people in these cases that are well documented, they take these out and they anonymize them. And then they analyze what happened. And they analyze what happened based on a core concept of what ethical dilemma led to the dispute. So instead of saying, why did the 2 people fight? They would look at the underlying ethical issue that made them fight in the first place. And then they would develop principles, and these principles, they would send them to the sister organizations who would educate the whole community. So it would bring up the level of the whole community to a higher level that has less disputes in general. Very interesting model, right? Now, ethical perspectives, as I said, they're looking at that underlying issue that resulted in the conflict. I'll give you some examples. So they have mediated many business cases, many. And they said, okay, let's analyze what resulted in the problem in the first place. And then they said, we're going to put 7 elements together that any contract that an Ismaili person goes in, they should adhere to. They should have the following 7 things documented. And if they do, they will lower the potential for dispute dramatically. For example, and it sounds very, very Islamic, right? For example, you should have, define the purpose and shared goals behind the partnership. Okay, that makes sense. Do you think most people in our community, when they go into business, they actually sit down and write this stuff? No. Expectations are qualified, which means that when you come to quantified, when you say I'm going to put money in, you write down how much money you're going to put in. It's quantified. And then you document the personal interest. So some people go into business, they have another underlying business. It could be a jumping ship kind of thing. I'm going to just establish this business in order for me to get a CEO, to become a CEO in another company. So the other person, he's coming in or she's coming in, she has her heart into this business, but he doesn't know why this stuff. So the person jumps in, rides the wave a little bit, and then jumps off, and the other person is left dead in the water. Implement management based on best practices, including risk and future considerations. This makes sense from a business perspective. Define how success is evaluated. We jump into business. Is success getting 100 people as clients? Is success 1,000 people? Maybe from my perspective, it's 100 people. I'm good, right? Like then I want to just sell the company. From someone else, no, I want to grow this into a multi-billion-dollar international company. So how do you define success? And then provide a dignified exit strategy. So if someone wants to quit, how do they quit without going to court? How do you get out of a partnership without destroying everything and everyone around you? So they're saying that you have to write down a way to get out that is dignified. And the last one is including a clause addressing conflict management and resolution approaches. So if the two business partners, they go into conflict, how do they want to resolve it? Because the first thing that comes, let's take them to court. So having a clause saying, no, we're going to do ADR, we're going to do mediation is very important. So this is general business. Now look what they also did for inheritance. Imagine a Muslim community right now says, we're going to do something similar for inheritance. Oh man, we're going to all be on the media. What they did is that they developed a framework called Guidelines for Ethical Wealth Transfer Inheritance Planning. If you guys don't know, the Ismaili community has a lot of old wealth. What that means is that generational wealth. Very, 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 very wealthy. Locally, nationally, and internationally. Which means that, if someone passes away, there could potentially be conflict that doesn't just hurt that family, but that can hurt so many other people. Like imagine when Bezos, Amazon founder, when he divorced from his wife, imagine if they were going to split the company Amazon into two entities. Amazon might not exist after that. So they might have had some clause somewhere to protect not just themselves, but protect everyone, the ecosystem of Amazon. So they've developed these guidelines that have in it the Ismaili fiqh of how inheritance happens, but they don't enforce it as arbitration. They recommend it as a mediation tactic. Okay, we all want to be part of this community. Here's some guidelines according to the Ismaili tradition of how to inherit money. So some reflection here. You guys notice the emphasis on the word ethics, ethical, akhlaq. And I asked the chairpersons, I said, well, why don't you use fiqh, like faith-based fiqh or legal maxims? And he said what we're looking for are universals that go beyond the legal maxims. Legal maxims can be translated as qawa'id fiqhiyya. And he said that the demographics in Canada is changing so much that the Ismaili community is marrying from other faith groups. So if they come to us to resolve a situation and we say we were using the Ismaili framework, immediately the other person would feel that they've taken sides. Right? Right? And they didn't want that. And they took these principles and they said, okay, we're going to group them into three things. One of them is called the internal orientation, niyyah. The second one is external orientation, adab. And the last one is purposive orientation, which is amana. So niyyah, adab, and amana. Niyyah, I'm coming in to resolve this in an ethical way. Adab is that I'm dealing with the other person in the best manner. And then amana is that I am, after the decision is reached or agreement is reached, I'm executing that in a way that would help the whole community to heal. So the amana here has three principles under it. One of them is the healing of the community. We don't want this to continue to propagate from generation to another. And CAP is free. I was very surprised. If a person is Ismaili, they can access the services for free. And I asked why is that? They said because we want to focus on the ethical outcome instead of the financial cost and gain to the practitioner as well as the parties. Does this make sense so far? Is it?
How they fund that institution or they fund that project?
I did not ask specifically, but because it came as a directive from the Aga Khan, there's a difference between, so the Ismailis are considered a Shia understanding of Islam. In Shiaism, there is a figurehead. That figurehead has what's called the charismatic appeal to it, which means that when they make them a decision, the whole community listens to it. In the Muslim community, we should be listening to, or the Sunni community, we should be listening, to the Imam and whatever, but it's a bit more decentralized from a faith perspective. So when the Aga Khan makes a decision, immediately the organizations under them, they make this happen. How exactly, I'm not sure. I didn't ask that question specifically. But because it's a directive, which means that everyone will work to get it done. Well, like sometimes for us, an Imam makes a decision like, brother, come on. 5 more minutes, Chef? Okay. Very quickly, this is just some thoughts about if we were as a community wanting to develop something similar. Very quickly. I want to explain something to you. Can you guys see? Okay. So what are the foundations of our faith? Quran and Sunnah, right? Everybody agrees to that, right? Anyone debates that? No? I'll send Qabas at you. He will bite your head off. Okay. Now, let's say we want to derive a rule for a new scenario, something that has never existed in the Islamic tradition. What do? We take the Quran and Sunnah, we look through the lens of usul al-fiqh, foundations of fiqh, and then we come up with ahkam or rulings, right? So a mujtahid, a scholar, a proper scholar, would be able to derive from the Quran and Sunnah. This is very rough model, by the way, very rough model. I don't want you to go and say, Mustafa said this. This is very rough model to show you where I'm getting at this. Now you have ahkam, a whole bunch of rulings in all areas of life. If you take these rulings and you attempt to universalize the values behind them, so you look at all of them and you're trying to say, okay, what is the Sharia wanting to do? All these ahkam. Then you can come up with what's called al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, legal maxims. So again, we start from the Quran and Sunnah, we wear the glasses of usul al-fiqh, we derive rulings, and then if we group these rulings into universals, we get what's called qawa'id fiqhiyya. Does that make sense so far? Generally speaking? This is very technical, by the way. So, al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya has also levels. We can look at the major ones. And I'll read them to you. All the madhahib of the Sunni schools of thought, they have an agreement or a relative agreement on this. These are the major ones. So one of them is al-umuru bi-maqasidiha. Matters are determined according to their intention. Al-yaqinu la yazulu bi-shakki. Certainty is not dispelled by doubt. If there's something that is certain, in order to change it, you have to have another certainty. We do not dispel certainty with something that's doubtful. La darara wa la dirar. No harm and no reciprocation of harm. Very general. You don't want to hurt people and you don't want to return harm with another harm. Al-mashaqqa tajlibu at-taysir. When there's a difficult situation, this necessitates some ease. So the ruling that comes out has to ease the lives of people. And the last one is al-'adatu muhakkama. Custom or social norm is an arbiter. Now, I can stand here and explain all these to you, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you an example. So let's take one of them. Custom is an arbiter. In Canada and in North America generally, if someone is in the importing and exporting business, so let's say Dr. Nasser comes and he says, Mustafa, I would like 10 MRI machines, import them for me from China, for example. I say, okay, brother, they cost $10 million, pay me $10 million, and we ship them from China, they come to the borders, and now there is some importing fees. Who pays these fees? Myself or Nasser? Who? The receiver, the purchaser. This is a social norm, right? In other countries, no, it's not like this. This social norm means that if me and Nasser go to a paralegal like Samara and we say, look, he's asking me to pay the custom fees, and I'm saying, no, the custom norms here are, he pays it. If she is a faqiha, if she's a mujtahida, she'll be like, no, custom is an arbiter, which means that, Nasser, you should be paying this, because the social norms dictate that you pay the importing fees. I'll give you another example. Marriage according to Syrian customs. So in Syria, generally, when a person gets married, they have a mahar, a dowry. And they divide this dowry into two. Muqaddam, an advanced, and mu'akhar, delayed. Because the poor shabab, the poor youth, they cannot pay the huge mahar. So they divide it into two. Anyhow, I could talk. Anyhow, we'll talk inshallah. So let's say a group of Syrians immigrated to Canada. And now they're in front of a sheikh. And they're trying to debate. They're trying to get divorced. And the sheikh looks at the document and he says, look, in Canada we don't have mahar. Here in Canada you just pay X amount and that's it. You woman, you don't get the delayed mahar. Is this right? No. Why? Because the marriage contract was done according to the Syrian customs, the Syrian tradition, the Syrian social norm. So the faqih or the imam would look at it and say, look, I understand in Canada we don't do this, but this contract is according to a custom that is somewhere else. So I'm going to rule that you pay the rest of the mahar to her before I divorce you. Does that make sense? Now, as you can see, I had to explain all of this. A proposal that we can look at is that instead of using these legal maxims, we should be able, as a Muslim community, to derive universal principles. I'll give you an example. Custom is an arbiter. We could change this to respecting diversity and multiculturalism. And what that means is that now it's becoming inclusive of all madahib, understandings, identities, but also there is no potential for misunderstanding. If someone reads this, does anyone misunderstand this? But if I go and tell you custom is an arbiter, how many questions would I get? Probably 5 questions from every single person here, right? So as a Muslim community, if we want to move forward, this is going to come inevitably to BC. Inevitably. So when this comes here, we need to start thinking what happened in the past and not make these mistakes again. Our community faces the same challenges as any other community. People think the divorce rate in the Muslim community is lower than the general society. It's not. And in some communities, it's even more. If people think that we Muslims, because we're Muslims, we don't have business disputes, oh man, you should see some of the stuff that's happening out there. So yes, so this still needs a lot of work, but in conclusion, the demand for faith-friendly approaches to resolving disputes is there. It has to be more lucrative, which means that it has to be faster, cost-efficient, and private. So next time somebody has a dispute, before you say take them to court, say let's go take them to mediation, inshallah. And we must spend time learning from other communities. I didn't put in the model the models from the native community and from the Christian communities, but these are models that exist that we can learn from them as well. And it must be done professionally with good planning. Jazakumullahu khairan. I'm going to switch right now to my MC hat. So inshallah, we have few minutes right now for questions and answers for Sister Samara and for myself, if I can answer any questions. So any questions for Sister Samara or myself, inshallah? Yes, sister.
Just for clarification, so when you mentioned that the progressive females started the movements and all this, was it truly just because of miscommunication and not understanding what the 30 community members were trying to get at?
A huge part of it. So the more I talked to the people that were involved, the more it became apparent it was fear. It was fear-based. The first image that comes to people's minds is when you mention Sharia, is that now the woman would need to be forced to wear hijab, cutting hands, all this stuff. And many of those figures that opposed it, they became international figures. They've written books, they've done things which until today, the Muslim community is suffering from trying to rebuttal. So, and that's why when we do planning, usually strategic planning, there's something called resisting the resistance. Any sort of change that happens in any organization or community, there's a resistance to it. There's a scientific way to analyze this. And without a plan to resist that resistance, this stuff happens. It happens, more often than I would love to tell you. Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of things happening around that time, 2003, and bad timing, bad timing.
First of all, Jazakallah, during your presentation, this requires that the two parties are approaching in good faith with the intention to resolve the issue. Is there any fail-safes if, say, one of them doesn't want to resolve the issue, or one of them is making the issue bigger than it needs to be? Is there any approach to handle that?
In the Muslim community or in other communities?
Models and CAB and
Yes. So what CAB does is that when they start, when they bring the two disputants together, they educate them. They have a session or workshops to educate them what it means to try to resolve something in an amicable way. That part tries to bring the hearts together, bring the niyyah together. This is the first part, is trying to bring the niyyah together. And it's very difficult. When you fight with someone, unless you're an angel, you just wouldn't be able to see them as a human being anymore, right? Especially if it's a tough fight. So they try to educate them. And then once they reach that, if they call it the buy-in. So it's a process that they follow. They get the buy-in from everyone. Once they get that buy-in and everyone, felt, okay, I really want to resolve this, they're like, okay, now let's start the process of mediation. And now the person has committed himself not to a specific outcome, but to just being ethical. Being ethical could mean many things. One of them, it could be like, well, I'm going to try to see the perspective from his or her side. Be like, okay, well, I really don't like this, but part of the process is for me to try and see how Nasser is thinking about this. Maybe he's coming from, another country. Maybe that was the custom and they didn't know about it. So, okay, Brother Nasser, I'm really sorry. I know this is something that you would do. How about if I give you maybe a discount on the maybe the 11th MRI machine or something like that, right? But that is the part that they go at. Now, assume this at the end of the day doesn't work because only 70% of the cases succeed. That's why they're offering the arbitration, because some people, they just cannot come to a decision together. It doesn't matter how long you sit them together, they cannot come to a decision together. They need someone to make a decision. In fact, I was with the CEO of an organization, and this organization comes into other organizations, and one of the things they do is that they make decisions for them, because they can reach a point where they cannot make any decisions. So in that part, now they move to the next layer, which is signing an arbitration agreement, saying, okay, I'm going to go into arbitration, this is binding, this is an arbiter, they're impartial, you don't have to pay for them, they're going to rule according to Canadian law, and this is what's going to happen. And then once that is done, it's binding. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, please.
These courts, for example, the Dar al-Qada, how much freedom do they have as an arbitrator? Like, if they want to do any hukm from the Sharia, are they be able to implement it even if it goes against the Canadian law?
So that depends. Again, it all depends. If it doesn't get appealed, nobody cares, right? If it doesn't get appealed and both sides agree to it as a mediation, we're good, right? It's private, it's done, I agree with you, okay, maybe it's unfair, but I'll pay you a little bit more money, whatever, I agree with it. The problem that comes is that if this reaches an appeal level in which the court has to be involved in. The moment the court has to be involved in, they have safeguards according to Canadian law and Canadian ethics and values to define what is fair, to define what is equitable, to define what is Canadian, if you will. If that arbitration conflicts with that, the court can overrule that decision.
Could they apply a head punishment if you're an arbitrator?
In Canada? No, that's not allowed. No, these tribunals, they don't do criminal or capital punishments. Nobody does that in a community level. That's a court level decision. This is more of a business and family issues. So nobody can come and say, okay, well, I'm going to apply the capital punishment to you because I'm an arbiter and my decision is binding. That's criminal law. So it's not commercial or private. Am I saying things right there?
Yes.
Okay, you sure? Because you're a paralegal. I'm a researcher.
First of all, I'd just like to say that I found that really interesting, and I'd like to talk to you afterwards. I have a couple of questions just for my own benefit. But yes, and I would like to add that in my experience, because I've been, I don't want to go to, I'm loud, I will not use the microphone. Thank you, Mustafa. In my experience, a lot of litigation and arbitration arise from general civil litigation disputes. Civil litigation is basically, in layman's terms, when two people have a disagreement and one is going to sue the other. Civil litigation, and yes, family. But the criminal is a whole other realm. And I will just add that in my experience, oftentimes in my world, my boss, for example, strays away from arbitration simply because an arbitrator, whilst experienced and educated in some ways, they don't know the law as well as a judge. So mediation is quite a bit more common, even though the idea of getting a final decision is appealing, but getting a decision from an arbitrator is a bit more risky, I shall say. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, a little bit more risky than going to a judge who has just much more experience.
Yes, thank you so much. Any other questions for Sister Samara or myself? And yes, brother.
I would like to answer the question of a sister who was wondering the free card of the Ismailis. The free card of the Ismailis.
Okay.
Every Ismaili, no matter what age, what he or she does for business, have to pay 10% of their income to Al-Rahman Foundation. And that's how it is paid. So the foundation pays for it.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't know that. So I guess that's how they fund a lot of the initiatives.
And the delivery of your 10 MRIs in the quotation before entering into buying or selling. The quotation should mention FOB, free on board. That indicates where, solves all of it.
Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair. Yes, brother.
So we were discussing earlier regarding the opposition from the progressive women back in 2003 to 2006. So I'd like to know if your research has provided any kind of ideas, what kind of ideas they are proposing, because they are completely not compliant to the Sharia law, right?
So the drive was basically to stop the progression of the IICJ, which is the tribunal that Sayyid Mumtaz Ali was trying to establish. Because once you have precedents, it becomes difficult to reverse that, right? Like once it's established and it's well worked out, now people would see, what it is. They can potentially accept it more and more. So the premise behind it is to be that anti-faith-based tribunals, basically in family law. And they succeeded in that. They succeeded in that. They basically wanted Canadian law to be applied. And I don't blame them for that. And I'm telling you right now, me standing here, who's educated, I don't blame them for that. Because we as Muslims, we didn't figure out the model. Like if you actually look at, I read these documents. I spend, I'm telling you, days and days reading all these legal documents, reading the law, reading, the research, the academics. And if you ask someone, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to rule by Sharia? It's very difficult to find an answer. What does it mean to, if someone is Hanafi, for example, and they come and you have them, and the other person is Shafi'i. How do you rule by that? Well, one of the documents said it'll be the choice of the two to make a decision. But here's the problem. In order to rule across madahib or across understandings, or even across people that might say they're against madahib, you need to be a faqih. And a faqih is someone that has an understanding of all the madhahib, which means that they would not just have mastered their own madhab, but they would have mastered other madhahib as well as over 50 other disciplines in Islamic studies. 50. In Canada, maybe I can name 2 people that I would call faqih. In all of Canada, only 2. Everybody else is da'iyah, is someone that calls, someone that is a muqallid, that adheres to a specific madhab, but they're not mujtahid. Like how would you do that then? Like, let's say, two people come. Well, maybe that scholar might only understand the Hanafi madhab. They would rule by it. But is that really the best way? Is that really going to get consensus? I've seen this in my own eyes in some marriage contracting. Marriage contracting, it should be very simple. In front of my own eyes, I was attending that the imam that is conducting the marriage was following I think the Shafi'i madhab, and then the person who was sitting, the father of the daughter, did not follow that, and they almost fought over it, fought over the wording of the marriage contract. So now imagine you take this to another level: sexual abuse, domestic abuse, children, custody, money, all this stuff. So until now, I personally haven't come across a framework from the Muslim community, from the Sunni Muslim community, that is being tested. So do I blame them? I don't. Do I like it? No, I don't, because it created a big mess. To open that file again, it will be very, very difficult on Ontario. But this is going to come to BC at some point. It will come. And when that comes, how are we going to deal with this? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, with the answer that you provided to my question, I was just wondering why did the Imam choose to opt for an answer that would go before madahibs were present in the society, before the Hanafi school of thought came into picture? Why didn't he propose the way Prophet ﷺ had organized it? Because all these madahibs obviously come from the main source, which is the knowledge and the hikmah that Prophet ﷺ was gifted from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
You asked me to be a faqih. I'm not, but I'll show you this again. So when we come to derive laws usually in Islam, very roughly, you send them through the lens of usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is an understanding of how you derive law in Islam. Usul al-fiqh are not the same between the different madahib. So different madahib, they have different usul for them, which means that intrinsically it will lead to different rulings, which is fine. In Islam, that's part of the mercy. It's fine, as long as the person that's doing it is a mujtahid, is someone who is at a level of scholarship that mastered those 50 plus sciences in the tradition, so that when they look at what they're saying, or when they look at the situation, they see much, much, much beyond the superficial